Hello, everybody. This is Joe Joseph, and this is your daily news update brought to you by thedailysheeple.com. And I've got some great stuff for you today. I want to start off with this article by NBC News. William Arkin has this article, CIA Prepping for Possible Cyber Strike Against Russia. Let me first say, for the record, that it's kind of odd that if you have a clandestine operation prepping for a possible cyber strike against a foreign nation, isn't it a little bit weird that they're broadcasting it on the mainstream media, on national television, that they're going to be doing a strike like this? The article says that the Obama administration is contemplating an unprecedented cyber covert action against Russia in retaliation for alleged Russian interference in the American presidential election, U.S. intelligence official told NBC News. Let me stop there. Isn't it interesting that they're saying retaliation for alleged Russian interference in the American presidential election? I find that as a convenient excuse, not so much to defend any candidate themselves, but maybe to lay the groundwork or the foundation to say, hey, the election was corrupted and we don't like the outcome. It's a very real possibility. I'm not saying elections will be canceled or anything like that. We've heard that how many times in these prior election cycles that, oh, yeah, there's a good chance the elections will be canceled. I don't think that's going to happen. But it certainly lays the groundwork for them to be invalidated in some way, shape, or form, even though we know that there's shenanigans that happen all the time. And I find articles like this extremely suspect, and I'll tell you why. Because in 2013, there was an act that was repealed, and it was a very powerful act that kept propaganda campaigns within the United States illegal. That's not to say they didn't happen, but they were illegal. It was called the Smith-Mundt Act, and it was repealed in 2013. This Foreign Policy, of course, Foreign Policy magazine is the media arm of the Council on Foreign Relations. And it's interesting. They said U.S. repeals propaganda ban, spreads government-made news to Americans. Interesting. Of course, we know that Operation Mockingbird started in the 1940-ish, 40 time frame, and it still goes on today. Your media is bought and paid for. They have entangling alliances, whether it be politically motivated or otherwise, that biases their output and, in turn, makes the people biased. And this article says, for decades, a so-called anti-propaganda law prevented the U.S. government's mammoth broadcasting arm from delivering programming to American audiences. But on July 2nd of 2013, that came silently to an end with the implementation of a new reform passed in January. And so what happens is now, because the Smith-Mundt Act is repealed, NBC News can go ahead and legally pass this stuff through. Even though they were doing it before, Congress gave them the go-ahead in 2013 to go ahead and do this. And again, I just find it very odd that they're going to put this out in the mainstream media, because if it wasn't fear tactics, and this is just my 2 cents, if it wasn't to stoke fear, division, angst within the populace, they wouldn't put it out. They would just go ahead and do a cyber strike. Why do they need to put it out on the news? It's very suspect indeed. And certainly there's a lot of things that are going on that would make it seem like we are ripe for some sort of event. Here's another thing. Freedom Outpost just put an article out. New Obama executive order hints at devastating space event. Could disable large portions of the electrical power grid, causing cascading failures. I know a lot of people out there have gone and really ramped up their preparations, making Faraday cages for their electronic devices in the event that there is some sort of solar event. We know that the sun is acting very quiet. Its activity is very quiet. That's not to say that we can't have something happen, a solar flare or a coronal mass ejection. But why now? the White House and science has known about the problems associated with solar flares and coronal mass ejections for a long time. Now, all of a sudden, there's a sense of urgency. This is according to whitehouse.gov. It says the executive order coordinating efforts to prepare the nation for space weather events. It says space weather events in the form of solar flares, solar energetic particles, and geomagnetic disturbances occur regularly, some with measurable effects on critical infrastructure systems and technologies such as GPS, satellite operations, communications, aviation, and the power grid. Let me stop there and say that I was given a figure by somebody within the electrical industry that put the amount of hardening our electrical grid, the cost, at about $2 billion. Now, when you look at how the money that we've spent on illegal wars, that is a small price to pay for ensuring that our electrical power grid is protected against these events. Now, the interesting thing about this is this is a 90-day executive order. So it just, again, why the sense of urgency? I don't understand why now. You look at the elections and the way things are going, and if they need an event, you could simulate a solar flare, or you could simulate a coronal mass ejection, or you can simulate some sort of geomagnetic disturbance with a high-altitude nuclear explosion that would cause an EMP that would knock out power grids, or you can blame it on a foreign country, a North Korea. The possibilities are endless. But this certainly does, again, lay the groundwork for something to happen. I'm not saying it will, but I'm saying that there's a narrative that's being formulated and put out to the people and putting it into the consciousness of society. And that's troubling. That's very troubling to me. You know, because we're talking about, you've got UK, the Express in the UK, that's talking about nuclear war imminent, as Russia tells its citizens to find out where the closest bunkers are. Here in the United States, God only knows where the fallout shelters are. People don't know where the closest fallout shelter is. We haven't had drills like that since the 80s. I'd say that probably a lot of the fallout shelters that existed then don't exist anymore. Over in Russia, they're building them like crazy. This article says nuclear war could be imminent as Russia told its citizens to prepare urgently for a devastating radioactive conflict as relations with the West stoop to their lowest since the Cold War. And, of course, we've seen a lot of fear-mongering and a lot of saber-rattling on both sides. And, you know, the U.S., of course, blaming Russia for hacking and all this. Are you telling me that the United States doesn't hack? Part of that NBC News article said, oh, well, we might go out and dig up some dirt on the oligarchs over there and all their offshore money. As if the United States doesn't have oligarchs that park their money offshore. I mean, it's ridiculous. Here we are, the pot calling the kettle black. You know, those that live in glass houses shouldn't throw stones. Yet here we are doing exactly that and ratcheting up the rhetoric. For what? What can possibly be gained from a nuclear conflict? And it says a terrifying Russian television broadcast explicitly told civilians to find out where their nearest bomb shelter is and repeatedly asked viewers if they were ready for a nuclear war. One apocalyptic broadcast told viewers on Moscow's state-owned TV channel NTV, quote, "If it should one day happen, every one of you should know where the nearest bomb shelter is. It's best to find out now." I mean, this is extremely interesting. But, the host of NTV said that he actually blasted America's impotent behavior and spent 2 hours warning that this conflict could take nuclear dimensions. Again, it's not to say that it wouldn't. I just have to ask, it takes a special kind of somebody to push the red button, if you know what I mean. And I just wonder who has the cojones to do it, because you're talking about mutually assured destruction if something happens between the United States and Russia. And don't forget that Russia is bound by treaty with other countries. Other countries are going to respond. China's going to respond. NATO will respond against China and Russia. It's just going to be a mess. And the United States, look, The oligarchs have their shelters, right? You've got the deep underground military bases for continuity of government operations. But what about the people? Those shelters don't exist for the most part anymore, nor do Americans know where anything is. And this is a critical problem. And it's something that you should at least start to do some research with and prepare for should a situation like this arise. What do you do? And are you close to any place that would be in a target package for the Russians? I don't even know, but it would certainly be advantageous to look it up. Now, the Sun over in the UK, they're putting it out. Why? The end is nigh. And they give 9 of the safest places in the world to survive a third world war. Very interesting. They list Iceland as a great place. They say that Iceland is hundreds of miles away from any other land, so it shouldn't be a target of a World War III scenario. And what more, it's a great spot for fishing, so survivors would have abundant food supply to keep them going until the world's rebuilt, because people could just go en masse to Iceland. Over in Scotland, guys, you have the Isle of Lewis. This Scottish island is self-sufficient and situated 3 hours away from the mainland. Simply put, it's a nice enough place to live without attracting attention to yourself. Oh, and then they list, of course, Antarctica, because, that's a good place to go if you like the cold. It says it may be a bit nippy, but in a worst-case scenario, you'd probably be safe if you manage to carve out a life in the continent's barren wastes. I guess you'll have plenty of food with fish and other, life there, but I don't know. In the United States, they say that Kansas City is a place to go. It says in the event of a non-nuclear war, this is the place to be. The city is surrounded by fertile farmland and is the ideal spot to defend against attackers. Then, of course, you have the Canadian Yukon, one of the most remote regions in Canada, and the Yukon province is well off the grid. And to make matters even better, it's mineral rich and jam-packed with wildlife, meaning you could get rich and eat well whilst waiting for the apocalypse to blow over. And then they have Cape Town in South Africa. South Africa is well out of the way, I would say, of any World War III conflict. And again, it's a place where you could survive. They also list Guam. I don't know if Guam would actually be a safe place, especially with China being in the mix. I'm sure Guam is in the target package. And then finally, you have Switzerland, Bern, Switzerland. Switzerland always seems to stay neutral in all of these conflicts. And you have Tristan da Cunha, and that's a collection of islands in one of the remotest places on Earth and is one of the top fishing spots. And so these are places, I guess, that in a pinch, if you've got the way to get there, you could go there and probably survive the apocalypse, according to the Sun. Very interesting. And, of course, we also have these banking, economic problems as well. A lot of warnings from big banks, according to SHTFplan.com. There's 5 of them out there, these urgent warnings, saying that the economy's gone suicidal. And it says it's working against the very people who need its energy to survive. It's collapsing on its own weight. Of course, it's talking about banks. And the weight of literally incalculable levels of toxic debt. And it's going to create the greatest disaster of our time if the warnings from the world's most powerful bankers are any indications. And it lists 5 of them. HSBC, of course, issued this red alert over the imminent sell-off of stocks. You have the IMF, who has issued a stability warning over Deutsche Bank. Deutsche Bank, one of the biggest banks in the world, Germany's biggest bank, better yet, Europe's biggest investment bank. And right now it's in the grips of a horrible crisis. Of course, with fractional reserve banking, I think they've got a $16 trillion balance sheet as far as assets, but they have $162 trillion in liabilities. Nothing's going to survive something like that. You also have Bank of America warning that a recession is imminent and unavoidable. I don't think we've ever gotten out of a recession. It certainly feels that way to a lot of Americans, myself included. You've got it's called the Macquarie Group. They're leading investors warning that the private sector will never recover from QE3 and the age of human jobs is over. That's pretty interesting, too, because, you know, with the advent of AI and the advancements in robotics, human labor is going to be more and more obsolete as time goes on, and it's going to accelerate in its pace. So that is a ticking time bomb waiting to happen. And, of course, you've got the Bank of International Settlements that's saying, it's basically the central banks of all central banks, warning that the Chinese economy is on the verge of meltdown because they're living on credit, big time, huge credit. And speaking of living in credit, the Economics Collapse blog, our good friend Michael Snyder over there, says that Americans are drowning in debt, that 35% of all Americans have debt that's at least 180 days past due. 35%, over 1 in 3. That's crazy. He says, I don't know about you, but to me, that's a shocking figure. And you'll see 35% of people living in the country have debt in collections. And when a debt is in collections, it's at least 180 days past due. And this is happening during the economic recovery that the mainstream media keeps touting. Although the truth is that Barack Obama is going to be the only president in the history of the United States of America to never have a single year where the economy grew by at least 3%. It just hasn't. It's been stagnant. And you have to think that if things remain status quo, it's going to get worse, not better. And they may maintain 1%, but that's about it. And when you have that kind of growth, you're not going to have job creation. And even if you did have job creation, what kind of jobs are you creating? Are you creating it for robots? Are you creating it for AI? You know, a lot of low-income Americans are finding it harder and harder to find work now because a lot of the low-income jobs are being replaced by these systems, by kiosks, say like at McDonald's, fast food joints, convenience stores are being replaced by self-service kiosks. If you go to Walmart, you've got self-checkout now. So there are ways that they're bypassing human labor and saving a ton of money on this, making it more profitable for the people of means and making it harder for the people who struggle to make ends meet. And so when you take a look at all of this in its totality, and you look at the shenanigans going on with this election, which, by the way, I mean, is the biggest circus that I have seen ever in elections, you know, and I'll tell you, I didn't think it could get much worse with the Bush presidencies, and then Obama came along and it got worse. And I'll tell you this, whether it's Clinton or Trump, it's going to get worse. These people don't have your best interest at heart. There's a lot of people that are touting Trump, and he's saying all the right things, but he's just going to be a president that at the end of the day still has to work with a Congress beholden to special interests. Even if he has the best of intentions, and he may very well have the best of intentions, I don't know. All I can say is it is going to be a monumental battle for a president that bucks the trend to make any sort of progress with a legislative and a judicial branch like we have here in the United States. And that is just the plain old truth. This has been your Daily Sheeple News Update, your daily news update. Subscribe to us today on this YouTube channel, The Daily Sheeple, and check us out at thedailysheeple.com. I'm Joe Joseph. Have a great evening, everybody.